He thought he was just another man with a job, a daughter, and a few regrets, until his heart stopped for 9 minutes. What he saw on the other side shattered everything he believed about life, death, and who we really are. But this isn't just another near-death story. This is a warning, because what he discovered will make you question every assumption you've ever had. He was shown the full truth, not just about his own life, but about yours too. What if the small moments you ignore every day are the ones that echo into eternity? What if we've been measuring life by the wrong standards, chasing the wrong things, and missing the only thing that actually matters? This man came back not with answers, but with a message that could change the way you see the world and yourself forever. But the most terrifying part, he saw that most of us are sleepwalking towards something we're not ready for. Don't wait until it's too late to wake up. I was 41 years old when everything I thought I knew about life shattered in a moment I never saw coming. I work as an HVAC technician. Every day I crawl into tight attics, fix old heating units, and deal with electrical panels in homes that haven't been touched in decades. It's hard work, but it's honest. I've always taken pride in doing things right, in solving problems, and in helping people stay warm during the brutal Midwest winters. That day started like any other. I had my black coffee, kissed my teenage daughter on the head as she left for school, and grabbed my toolbox. I had 3 houses to visit that morning, and the first was just 10 minutes away. But as I was driving down Route 73, something didn't feel right. My hands started tingling, and my chest felt like it was being gripped from the inside. At first I thought maybe I was just tired. I hadn't slept well. But then everything around me started to blur, like I was drunk or dreaming. I pulled over before I hurt someone, or myself, and called my brother Nathan. "Something's off, man," I said. "I can't see straight and I feel like I'm fading." He told me to wait there, that he was on his way. I barely remember him pulling up beside me. The next thing I know, I'm on a stretcher being wheeled through the doors of a hospital I'd passed 100 times but never entered. Everything after that gets hazy. I remember lights, buzzing, beeping, voices rushing above me. A nurse's voice asking me to stay awake, but I couldn't. I felt my eyes roll back, and then I just let go. That's what it felt like, letting go of everything. I didn't know then that I had died. Not almost died, not went into a coma. I flatlined. My heart stopped for nearly 9 minutes. But this isn't about what the machines recorded. It's about what I saw when I left my body behind. The moment I slipped out of myself, I shot upward, through the ceiling, through the roof, past the floors and walls, like they were made of smoke. There was no pain, no fear, just awareness. I could see the hospital from above like it was a miniature, and my body was still inside. That's when the sky above me began to shift. At first it looked like clouds, thick, silver gray, swirling like a storm was about to break. But then they parted. Not in a meteorological way, but as if something intelligent, something purposeful, was parting them. They didn't dissolve. They opened. And behind them, something impossible was waiting. A massive corridor appeared in front of me, suspended in nothingness. The floor looked like polished stone, light gray, reflecting everything above it like a mirror. On either side stood tall figures in radiant robes, so bright it hurt to look directly at them. They had no wings, but I knew they weren't human. Their faces were not visible, and yet I felt they were looking directly into me. Not at me, but into me. Right in the center of the corridor stood a wooden door, plain and unfinished. No carvings, no metal hinges, just a door, but it pulsed with a presence I can't describe. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what this place was. My logical brain, the one that fixes electrical faults and diagnoses dead compressors, tried to explain it away. Maybe this was a hallucination. Maybe the meds were strong, but my soul knew otherwise. This was real, more real than the hospital, more real than the world I had left behind. I began moving toward the door, not walking, not floating exactly, but being pulled by something I couldn't see. The figures beside the door didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt no fear. There was a sense of silence so deep it almost rang in my ears. The closer I got, the more I felt something building, like pressure behind my chest, not painful, but overwhelming. It was anticipation, awe, a kind of recognition that defied logic. Then, in front of the door, a figure began to take shape. At first it was like light folding in on itself, not a spotlight or a glow, but something more alive. like light was being woven into flesh. Feet first, then legs, torso, arms, hands, neck, face. His appearance was simple. Brown skin like someone who worked in the sun, thick white curls, gentle brown eyes. He wore jeans and a plain white shirt tucked in like a man you'd see fixing a tractor on a quiet farm. There was no halo, no thunder, just presence. He didn't speak right away. He stood, hands on his hips, head slightly tilted as he looked at me, really looked at me. I waited for words, instructions, anything, but nothing came. Instead, there was only the weight of that gaze. Not heavy like judgment, but deep like love. A kind of love that melts your defenses without asking for permission. And then, finally, he said my name. Michael, he said. Just that. My name, spoken like a song I'd forgotten. We love you. And when he said it, when that word love hit me, it was like something detonated in my chest. Not just emotion, not memory, not even joy. It was the source of everything I'd ever longed for, the love I'd tried to earn, the approval I'd searched for in every job well done, every "I'm proud of you" from my father, every bedtime story I read to my daughter. It was all here, in that one word. He didn't say he was Jesus, but I knew. Not like someone told me, or I recognized him from a painting. I knew with a certainty that made everything else I ever believed feel like shadows on a wall. I didn't care about religion in that moment. I didn't care about doctrine. I just knew. This was him. I collapsed into his arms without even realizing I had knees to collapse onto. He caught me like he'd been waiting for me to fall. He held me there like I was the only thing in the entire universe that mattered. And in that moment, I forgot everything. My daughter, my work, my mistakes, my guilt, all of it. Not because they weren't important, but because this was the love I was made for. He kissed me on the cheek like a father welcoming a son home from war. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it shattered me. I didn't want anything else. Not a mansion in heaven, not golden streets, just to stay in that embrace forever. And then I looked up and saw something I still don't have words for. The sky above us. It wasn't sky anymore. It looked like smoke, but frozen, like a storm that had paused in mid-motion. Everything around me felt aware, like I was being watched, not by eyes, but by reality itself. And the women in the gowns were still there, still radiant, still silent, guarding something I hadn't yet understood. And it was in that silence that I realized something terrifying. I was not who I thought I was. Dear friend, if this story is moving something in your heart, don't let it slip away. If you're still here, it's because something in this message speaks to you. So, take a second, subscribe to this channel. Not because it's trendy, but because these stories have a way of finding those who need them most. And if you're feeling brave, share in the comments one thing you've experienced that made you question reality. Something that made you wonder, is there more? We're not just telling stories here. We're remembering something we've all forgotten. As I stood in that surreal stillness, I felt something change. Not in the air around me, but in myself. It was like my skin, my thoughts, my past, everything I was, began to dissolve into something more transparent, lighter, clearer. And that's when it happened. Without words, without instruction, Jesus looked at me again, and the world behind him vanished. In its place, I saw my life unfold, not in fragments, not in flashes, but in full, like someone had unraveled every moment from beginning to end and laid it before me. And it started with my birth. I saw it, literally, the room, the clock on the wall, the nurse's hands, my mother crying, my father's awkward smile, the smell of antiseptic in the air, things I could not possibly remember, but I did. I was there again, and then it all moved forward. Every birthday candle, every scraped knee, every time I lied, every joke I made at someone else's expense. It wasn't just a playback. I was in each moment, and more than that, I was everyone in it. I felt how my words made others feel. I felt my anger in their chest, my sarcasm in their self-esteem, my impatience in their anxiety. You think you're a good person, that your few mistakes are outweighed by your good intentions. I thought so too. But when I saw the ripple effect of my actions, not just direct ones, but the dominoes that fell in others' lives because of things I said or didn't say, it broke me. I cried, but I had no tears. I screamed, but there was no sound. I just felt everything. Like the whole weight of the world had been placed on me, not to punish me, but to reveal me. He didn't shame me. That's what shocked me most. He didn't say, "See what you did?" He just let me see. And that was more painful than any punishment could have been, because I finally saw myself the way he did. Not just what I had done, but who I had become by not facing the truth. I had convinced myself that I was better than most people. I didn't steal. I didn't cheat. I was faithful to my work and to my daughter. I thought that counted for something. But in that place, all the excuses and justifications were stripped away. I wasn't being judged. I was being known. And knowing myself like that was terrifying. It wasn't just the bad things either. I saw the good things I had done too. But then I saw where they came from. Moments where I had been kind, generous, selfless, and I realized those were never mine to begin with. They were given to me, placed in my heart by something greater. I couldn't even take credit for them. They were gifts, nudges from the Holy Spirit I had never acknowledged. I began to understand something profound. I had never truly seen the truth. I lived in a world of illusion, of ego, of comfort. And worst of all, I had mistaken that illusion for reality. And still, he stood there, not condemning me, not scolding me, but waiting. He had always been waiting. As I stood there, surrounded by the echoes of my own life, I felt smaller than I ever had before. Not small in the sense of shame, although that was there, but small like a single drop of water in an endless ocean. The scale of it all was staggering. I wasn't just reviewing moments. I was reliving the energy they carried into the world. And that energy was still moving, still touching others, long after I had forgotten the moment itself. There was a memory, just one, that shattered me more than all the others. It wasn't violent or dramatic. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was tired. My daughter wanted to show me something she had drawn, a colorful sketch with flowers and stars. I brushed her off, told her I was busy, and she went quiet. I barely remembered that day, but now I saw it through her eyes, how her shoulders dropped, how she held back tears, how she walked to her room and never showed me her drawings again. That moment grew roots. Years later, she'd struggle with confidence in her art. She wouldn't apply to that art school, wouldn't submit her portfolio, and it all led back to that Tuesday, to my tiredness, to my dismissal. And now I could feel what she felt, the rejection, the internalization, the silent belief that her creativity didn't matter, and I had planted that seed. I collapsed to my knees, if they were even knees, and wept from a place deeper than I knew existed. But again, he didn't condemn. He stayed there still, like the center of a storm, calm, watching, loving. At one point I asked, not aloud but from within, "How could you still love me after all this?" And the answer didn't come in words. It came as presence, as truth, because love isn't something he does. It's what he is. You can't earn it. You can't lose it. You can only choose whether or not to receive it. And I had spent most of my life refusing it, without even knowing it. I thought I was being self-sufficient, responsible, but I was just scared of surrender, scared of what it would mean to let someone else carry the weight, scared of what I might find in the silence if I ever stopped running. He let me see all of it, not to destroy me, but to restore me, to burn away the lies I had built around my identity so I could finally see who I had always been beneath it all. A beloved creation, not perfect, not proud, but precious. And just when I thought I couldn't handle anymore, he moved, just one step back, just enough to give space between us. He raised his right hand, not in judgment, but like a wave, a farewell that wasn't final. And I felt a pulling again, this time backward, fast, through the corridor, through the cloud, through the layers of sky and ceiling and wall, until I was back. I opened my eyes to the harsh brightness of the hospital ceiling, flat, square tiles lit by fluorescent bulbs. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. It felt like waking from the deepest sleep imaginable, but instead of grogginess, there was clarity. My body ached. My chest felt heavy. I could hear monitors beeping and voices muttering around me, but nothing felt real compared to where I had just been. My mother was beside me, holding my hand with both of hers. Her eyes were red and swollen. She was whispering my name over and over, like a prayer. On the other side of the room was my brother, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, pretending to be composed. But I could see his knees trembling. I wanted to tell them. I needed to tell them. But how do you explain something so beyond words? The doctor came in shortly after, clipboard in hand, and began listing possibilities. Severe allergic reaction, dual antibiotic conflict, electrical misfire in the brain. I nodded, said thank you, and let them explain. But none of their words could match what I had seen, what I had become. I didn't know what day it was. Time felt broken, like a glass that had shattered and been glued back together with invisible seams. I was told I had been gone, technically dead, for almost 10 minutes, and yet in that time I had lived more fully than in my 4 decades on Earth. They discharged me 2 days later, after several tests came back inconclusive. No signs of heart damage, no permanent neurological issues, just me, breathing, quiet, changed. When I got home, I walked through the house like a stranger in a museum. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't. The tools on the wall of my garage, the fridge magnets, the calendar with past appointments still circled in red, all reminders of a man I no longer was. I sat on the edge of my daughter's bed that night, watching her sleep, her face so peaceful, her hands curled under her chin the way she'd done since she was small. And suddenly, I remembered every time I had hurried her through a story, every time I'd promised later and never followed through. My chest clenched again, not from pain, but from realization. None of it had mattered the way I thought it did. The bills, the deadlines, the arguments, the pride, the moments I thought were worth my energy, they were shadows. And the ones I dismissed, the drawings, the bedtime stories, the simple act of listening, they were eternal. Those were the threads of real life. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by her bed until sunrise, praying, not with words but with presence. I didn't ask for more time. I didn't ask for a second chance. I simply gave thanks, for breath, for sight, for the unbearable mercy I had been shown. And then, slowly, I began to rebuild. Not my schedule, not my work, myself. The days that followed were strange, not in a supernatural sense, but in how ordinary they felt after everything I had seen. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The colors looked duller, the conversations shallower. I watched people stress over parking spots, complain about phone batteries, and argue over things that would be forgotten by next week. And it made me ache, not because they were wrong, but because I used to be just like them. I began to withdraw, not out of depression, but reflection. I couldn't go back to normal because I finally understood what normal had cost me. I stopped watching the news. I stopped scrolling endlessly through my phone. I stopped letting distraction fill the silence I had once feared. In that silence, I began to hear again. Not voices, not visions, just truth, gentle, unavoidable. I kept thinking back to what Jesus showed me, that love is the only thing that matters. It sounds cliché until you've stood in it, until you've felt it wrap around your soul like light itself. Everything else falls away, your reputation, your wealth, even your name. The only thing that remains is how much you loved and how much you let yourself be loved. I started going on long walks again, not for exercise, just to be outside, to be. The wind on my face felt like a conversation. The leaves rustling in the trees seemed to whisper things I had forgotten long ago. And more than once I stopped in my tracks and cried, not out of sadness, but from the weight of grace. How many years had I walked past the sacred without seeing it? One afternoon I returned to the attic of a client's home to repair a broken air duct. It was hot, tight, and full of dust. Normally I would have been annoyed, but that day I paused. I looked around. The light from a single bulb cast long shadows across the beams. A spider had spun a web across a nail, and the dust sparkled in the air. For a moment, I felt the same stillness I had experienced in that corridor of eternity. A reminder, even here, God is near. I began to pray differently too, less about what I wanted, more about what I feared I might forget. Help me remember what I saw, I'd whisper before sleep. Help me carry it with me into the chaos of the world, because already I could feel it, the tug of gravity pulling me back into distraction, into the comfort of who I used to be. But I didn't want comfort. I wanted truth. I wanted to live in a way that made others feel that same love I had felt. Not by preaching, not by arguing theology, but by showing up, by listening, by being kind when it wasn't convenient, by seeing others the way he had seen me, fully and still with love. And so I started small. I looked people in the eye when I spoke. I forgave faster. I told my daughter I loved her, every day, sometimes twice, just because. I apologized when I was wrong, even if it stung my pride. I left bigger tips. I asked strangers how they were doing, and actually waited for their answer. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, but it was real, and I felt closer to him in those moments than I ever did sitting in a pew. I didn't tell many people at first, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew they wouldn't understand. How could they? If someone had told me what I now believed with every cell in my body, I would have smiled politely and written it off as delusion or a dream. That's the thing about encounters with the eternal. They don't translate well into words. Language breaks down where eternity begins. But eventually I had to speak. It started with my daughter. One night, over dinner, I looked at her and said, "There's something I need to tell you." And I told her about the hospital, the corridor, the man with eyes like fire and arms like peace. I told her how I saw my whole life, how I felt the ripple of every word I ever spoke. I didn't expect her to believe me, but she didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She just looked at me and whispered, "I always knew there was more." That broke something open in me. I started sharing in quiet moments, with my brother, with my old friend Thomas, even with a client who was going through a divorce. I didn't preach. I didn't claim to know everything. I just told them what I saw, what I felt, and how it changed everything. And to my surprise, people didn't run. They leaned in. They asked questions. Some cried. Some confessed things they had never told anyone. And I realized something beautiful. Truth recognizes truth, even when wrapped in mystery. Still, I had my doubts. There were nights I lay in bed and asked myself if it had all been some elaborate trick of the brain. A hallucination caused by trauma. A desperate fantasy cooked up in a dying mind. But then I'd remember. How can something fake leave behind a love more real than anything I've ever known? Hallucinations fade, but this never left me. In fact, it only grew. There were days when I'd find myself staring out the window, watching the sun move across the sky, and I'd feel him again. Not in some booming voice or burning bush, but in the silence that follows, when all the noise of the world finally dies down. He was there, not outside me, in me. I began to understand that the experience I had wasn't about death at all. It was about waking up. It was about seeing clearly for the first time, not just spiritually, but in every way. I saw myself more honestly. I saw others more gently. I saw life, all of life, as sacred. The funny thing is, I used to think sacredness belonged in churches, or temples, or under the right lighting with the right words. But now I know, sacredness is in everything. In spilled coffee and traffic jams. In phone calls from old friends and strangers holding the door. In mistakes and tears and laughter and dust. Especially dust, because he's in all of it, waiting for us to see. One afternoon, a few months after I'd come back, I was working a job in a small rural house outside of town. It was the kind of place that smelled like old wood and forgotten memories. The heater was down, and the family, a retired couple with kind eyes, had been using blankets and space heaters to get by. I got down under their house, into the crawl space, and started inspecting the ductwork. It was dirty, cold, and cramped. But somewhere in that silence, with the ground pressing against my back and pipes above my head, I had the strangest thought. This is holy, not because of where I was, but because of how I was. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't grumbling. I was present, fully there, fully aware that the work of my hands mattered not because it was noticed, but because it was done with love. That realization began to seep into everything. I found myself whispering prayers in the truck between jobs. Not formal ones, just little conversations. Thank you for today. Help me see the next person through your eyes. Keep me soft. The world didn't change, but how I moved through it did. One evening I was standing in line at a gas station behind a man clearly struggling. His clothes were dirty and he smelled of sweat and cigarettes. People were shifting uncomfortably, pretending not to see him. But I couldn't not see him. Not after what I'd seen. He turned to me and asked for change. Not for beer, he said, just for bread. So I bought him a sandwich, a drink, and sat outside with him for 10 minutes. We didn't talk much. He just kept thanking me, eyes shining. And as I looked at him, I realized something that brought tears to my throat. He looked like Jesus, not in the literal sense, but in the sense that love was waiting in his eyes to be seen. And maybe that's what Jesus was showing me all along, that he hides in the places we ignore, in the broken, the forgotten, the people we pass on sidewalks without a glance. The further I got from the hospital, the louder the world became again. Bills, news, noise. But I clung to what I'd seen like a flame I refused to let go out. Some days I failed. I snapped. I forgot. I rushed through moments. I ignored my daughter's words when she needed me. But even in failure, I heard that quiet whisper in my soul. Come back. Just come back. He wasn't asking for perfection. He never was. He was just asking for presence, for honesty, for relationship. The more I remembered that, the more peaceful I became. Not because I had answers, but because I no longer needed them. I didn't need to solve the mystery. I just needed to walk in it, to live like love was real. Because it is. I had felt it, seen it, been held by it, and I never wanted to forget. There are moments now, quiet, sudden moments, when time slows down and I feel the veil thin. It can happen while I'm sipping coffee on the back porch, watching the birds pick at crumbs, or when I'm driving alone and a certain song plays on the radio, one I don't remember choosing. In those moments, I remember. I remember the corridor, the faces of light, the door that led nowhere and everywhere. I remember him, not as a figure of doctrine, but as a force so vast and tender it undid me. I've stopped trying to explain it to those who need proof. I'm not here to convince anyone. You either feel it or you don't. And if you do, no words are necessary. And if you don't, no words will be enough. People ask me now what I believe, and my answer is simple. I believe in love. Not the kind you see in movies or on Valentine's cards. Not the kind that fades when things get hard. I believe in the love that holds galaxies together and still kneels down in crawl spaces with broken men. The kind that speaks your name before you even realize you've forgotten who you are. I've come to see that we've had it all backwards. We chase comfort, success, admiration, but none of it lasts. We avoid pain, grief, humility, but those are the very places where the sacred hides. We measure our worth by what we achieve, when our worth was never up for debate. I remember lying in that hospital bed, newly returned from what I can only call eternity, and wondering how I would carry this truth into a world that moves too fast to notice its own heartbeat. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to change the whole world. Maybe we're just meant to love well the piece of it right in front of us. The woman at the register who's had a long day. The angry driver on the freeway. The child who just wants you to listen without checking your phone. That's where the shift begins. That's where eternity touches earth. Not in cathedrals or conferences, but in kindness no one will ever post about. I don't know how long I have left here. None of us do. But I know now that life is not measured in years, but in presence. In the weight of a moment given fully, in the courage it takes to forgive, in the silence you offer instead of snapping back, in the quiet way you carry hope for someone else. And when it's my time to go again, truly this time, I won't be afraid, because I've seen what waits on the other side. And it's not a judgment seat. It's not a checklist. It's not even a throne. It's an embrace. It's a kiss on the cheek. It's a voice saying, "We love you." Sometimes I wonder why I was allowed to come back, why someone like me, flawed, imperfect, just trying to make ends meet, was given a glimpse of something so sacred. And I think maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about you. Maybe it was, so I could tell you what's waiting when everything else fades. Not to scare you, not to preach at you, but to remind you, there is more, so much more. You are not your mistakes. You are not your trauma. You are not the worst thing you've done, or the pain someone else gave you. You are loved, utterly, completely, beyond what your mind can comprehend. And that love isn't locked away in some far-off place. It's here, now, waiting for you to slow down just long enough to feel it. If I could ask you to take one thing from my story, it's this. Don't wait. Don't wait until your heart stops to start living from the place that really matters. You don't have to die to wake up. You can begin now, with one act of love, one choice to forgive, one moment of stillness where you whisper, I'm ready, because he's been ready the whole time. Before we finish, I want to thank you for listening not just with your ears, but with your heart. This wasn't just a story. This was a piece of my soul. And if it found a place inside yours, then maybe you were meant to hear it. Maybe we all come together at the exact time we need to. So, if this touched you, don't go quietly. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this one. Not for numbers, not for clicks, but because we're building something sacred here. A space where people can remember together. A space where we're allowed to feel deeply, speak honestly, and heal loudly. And if you've ever had a moment, big or small, that made you question everything, tell us in the comments. Maybe you had a dream that felt too real. Maybe you heard a voice in the dark that saved your life. Maybe you saw a light in someone's eyes that told you there's more. Whatever it is, share it. We want to know. Because your story might be the one that keeps someone else going. Tell us how this touched you. Tell us what you're taking from it. And most of all, tell us who you're choosing to love more deeply today. We're not just a channel. We're a community. And you are a vital part of it.